All right, everyone, you ever get the sense that maybe Brexit's not actually going to happen and that what you're going to be left with under the best of circumstances is a deal that's basically not even Brexit to begin with? Brexit means Brexit, simple as, would say Nigel Farage or most of the smart population of the UK, but it appears that the Remoaner forces there have managed to stymie it. They got what they call a flextension till I think the middle of January 2020, which isn't that long an extension. I mean, we're almost in November right now. It's 3 months, and that's how long you have. The idea of a flex extension is that it can also be less than that. Like, it doesn't have to take place on that date. It can happen before if the UK is able to agree on a deal that the EU will also agree on. The problem remains the same. No deal that can possibly be hammered out by the EU that would be good for them, that they would vote forward, can also be agreed to by Parliament in the UK without an election happening to shuffle the deck and get some of the people that are being, basically unreasonable out of the UK's government first. But they decided to also table the idea of having an early election, which means that's not going to happen, which means they're going to kick the can down the road again. You will probably not see a Brexit even with a deal, therefore, in January. Now, what Farage has said, the wise man of the UK, is that what needs to happen is an extension is granted in order to allow an election so that the Brexit Party and other groups can make their voices heard so that they can get a lot of the Remainers out. It looks like what's going to happen is that the Labour Party is going to be crushed under, and it'll be mainly like a bunch of conservatives, most of whom are Brexiteers, but not all, and the Brexit Party versus some Labour movement Remainers who will retain their power and turn it into a Remain movement, but be much weakened, and then the Liberal Democrats and I guess the Green movement there on the other side, and then you have to wait and see who has the votes to actually advance an agenda. At that point, if you still have Remainers running things, you might as well just rescind the idea of Brexit. Don't even bother going forward because it'll be clear the globalists are not going to allow it to happen. You're a fucking slave. What I would say is this. What needs to happen in the UK is that the people there need to pull up their pants, take to the streets, and make it clear. You've already had a people's referendum. The people voted for Brexit. They want it to be advanced. They're tired of waiting. It doesn't matter if there's a deal. An election should be held so that the people there who voted for what they wanted can punish the members of parliament who refuse to allow Brexit to occur with or without a deal. Get your hard Brexit and then negotiate thereafter. If the UK leaves the EU, no strings attached, just bye-bye, here we're paying our whatever it is, multi-billion-dollar fee, because you did agree to that in a contractual sense, so fucking pony up the money. What ends up happening is then, as a sovereign nation and a large economy with a lot of allies around the world, you have better negotiating capabilities than you do now from within the EU. It's an illusion that you would have a better chance of getting a good deal right now. Look, the best deal that you've been advanced by the people of the European Union, by the governments there, the people that actually are in Brussels, towards the UK, the closest you've come to achieving a deal at all, fundamentally means being a slave to the EU, at least for the upcoming year or so, in a transitionary period in which you're still going to get fucked sideways up the ass by them. After that, you are kind of semi-sovereign, but not really. And that's the best deal you can possibly get, as the great former British Empire could get. That's the best you can do. In today's world, we have to be willing to accept that we're a little people. We're a little island, says people that once conquered a fifth of the world's surface. It's interesting to see how that happens. By the way, it's interesting. When we look at what's happened to what was once the world's greatest empire, which reigned for 100 years and stormed the seas and struck fear into the hearts of all of the world, its enemies and its friends alike at times. When we look at the fact that that got pissed away and is now incapable of even remaining part of a political union successfully and negotiating an exit without being abused, why do you think it is that Americans are so hesitant to take up like the Obama line of we need to manage our decline into history and get used to having a little bit less? We need to get used to being part of the world community, being a power instead of the power. We need to get used to a little bit less. No, thank you, because we can see on full display how that works out. You get abused by people who have a stick up their ass about you from the last couple hundred years. You get mistreated horribly. The only reason the UK at this point isn't being mistreated more is because it's still got a major military capability. a nuclear deterrent, namely. Partially sub-based, making it far more formidable, by the way, than some fielded in the world. You got to be nuts. So in other words, you might have a Brexit, but if you do, it's the worst possible Brexit deal. The thing is, Theresa May and the initial people that were negotiating wanted to set the stage for this exactly to happen. By going to the EU and saying, look, give us a deal. Well, we'll give you this shitty deal. Oh no, that's not what I meant. No, I meant a good deal. But Theresa May had already said everything's on the table. We expect nothing in particular. Basically, bend over and whip me, abuse me so that I can go back to the UK's parliament and ask them to sign off on a catastrophic deal that no sane person would even entertain. Oh, but my hands are tied. I couldn't do any better, said Theresa May when she came back. Yes, she could have. Trump even told her this on day one. Oh, he should have gone and made a big ask, and then they would negotiate from there. She could have gotten much more of what she wanted, but the thing is, she was always a Remainer. She was never in favor of Brexit to begin with. It's a bunch of fakery. It seems that that's a common thing among the Conservative Party there, that they say that they're in favor of sovereignty, but they're not really in favor of it. It's just political posturing, so they have a job. It's fine. They're not really conservatives, not after any measurable sense. Very interesting. Your labor movement doesn't represent the working class. Your liberal Democrats aren't classically liberal. Your Brexit party appears to be the closest you have to an authentic conservative movement. It looks like if there were an election held today, they and the Liberal Democrats would pretty much hold sway over the political process as far as whether you stay or go. Well, you can't have a people's referendum. You already had one. People already voted to Brexit. I thought that was fairly clear. It's interesting how in a lot of countries and in a lot of cases, people can hold a vote. It's supposedly binding, but then it ultimately means nothing. Sort of Stalinish. This happened in California on a lesser scale years ago with marijuana. I seem to remember California held a referendum. The voters approved legalized marijuana, and I think their Supreme Court stepped in and said, you're not allowed to do this, until they were overruled. And years later, of course, the decision was taken off, and now you have marijuana in California. The people made it clear by fairly large margin that they wanted that to be a thing. They were denied it despite the fact that the vote was, by their own state laws, completely legal. When these sorts of things happen, it should convince people who were in favor of remaining to Brexit. It should convince them, look, the bad guys, the billionaires that don't want to listen to democracy are all in favor of you being hamstrung by this particular political union. This federation of states, that the whole idea is to erase the concept of individual identities within Europe and replace it with just Europe. It makes it a lot easier for the rich and corrupt to shuffle money around, to move around if they want, and to embezzle more from you, to globalize their policies so that they can steal more money. If you think for a minute, when you say, well, if the EU were to become one state, it'd generate a lot more revenue. Well, maybe so. Free movement in the entire world, generate $10 trillion more GDP. Yes, and the 1% would get 99.9% of it. So what's the point? It's not going to benefit you. It's not going to benefit me. Do you have a multi-million-dollar bank account? Okay, it benefits you a little. Do you have a multi-billion-dollar bank account? Okay, yeah, you should be in favor of globalism. Otherwise, it doesn't help anyone. Gives brain drain to the poor country. Takes jobs away from, people who actually are with it in the richer parts of the world. Who does it help? It helps human scum. People who start wars and promulgate all sorts of authoritarianism and evil. So yeah, it'd be nice if the people of the UK, why aren't you protesting? Like, there's plenty of Remainers protesting. Where are all of the Leave voters? Where are the Brexiteers to show up and hold big-ass rallies like they were before? You're obviously the majority of the population. You won the vote. Where's the fervor? Nigel Farage and his people are the only ones that seem still to have it. It's rather sad. But don't say that people didn't warn you. I wasn't the only commentator years ago saying that the fundamental goal of Theresa May and people like her was to make sure there was never actually a Brexit in any meaningful sense anyway. If you take the deal that's being offered roughly now, you get a Brexit that is in name only. You're not actually out of the EU. You're still subject to all their rules and regulations. You're simply not a voting member of the EU anymore. You don't even get to vote on how you're abused. It's even worse than it has been the whole time. That's about all. Peace out.